Okay, Joel Wendt here. Continuing the discussion of the Hopi prophecy, and I've now stepped over into the world of Rudolf Steiner, suggesting that he's an individual that could do scientific research into the spiritual because of his particular capacities, and of course all those questions are rather complicated. I'm not so much interested in that particular thing right now, although we'll get to that later in these dialogues because those are important questions. But I did want to relate the fact that you can take the Hopi prophecy and Steiner's researches into the spiritual and combine them in a certain way. And it's not only appropriate to do that in terms of the younger brother and the elder brother idea, which I talked about last time, but the two sort of points of view actually mutually support each other. Now let's get into that a little bit. I talked at the end last time of the Steiner's naming the time in which we live the post-Atlantean age, which by implication means that that Atlantis, to his spiritual research, was a real place. And so what does he say about that? Well, he says a lot of different things about Atlantis. Let me just read what he says about the Native Americans. He says that when they, well, just in general, let's create a general picture first. He describes in his spiritual researches that at the time that Atlantis disappeared because of the actions of evil people, which is what the prophecy describes, the excesses of certain things that were done by people living on Atlantis caused the destruction of Atlantis. And this, of course, is what the Hopi prophecy describes. It says there was a land that was being destroyed because of the actions of evil, two-hearted people. And then there were migrations, and at a certain point in the migrations, there's the story of the two brothers, with one going to the west and one going to the east. And of course, from Atlantis, one can go into the Americas by going west. And this is what Steiner describes. He describes migrations into the Americas, and in several different places in the Americas, by people fleeing Atlantis. And he also describes people fleeing Atlantis and going east, and what they did. And in the Hopi prophecy, of course, we have this idea of the elder brother who went to the east. And this Steiner describes in great detail. It describes the people that migrated out of Atlantis to the east, traveling a long, long time, and eventually getting to an area near the Gobi Desert and the Himalayas. And that from there they founded a mystery center, because the Atlanteans did have a deep spiritual understanding of the world. And then out of that mystery center, then individuals went forth to help with the founding of the civilizations that eventually became China and India and Persia and Egypt and so forth. And this is all described in great detail in the works of Rudolf Steiner. And you can also, on the essays that I've listed in the end piece of these videos, and also there's links to these essays, you'll just see this in more detail. Here I just want to get to the story part of it. Anyway, so Steiner confirms this idea of the elder and younger brother in his spiritual research, where he describes people migrating from Atlantis west into the Americas, and also people migrating to the east. And that's one aspect of it. Another aspect of it is that the Atlantis, at the time that he describes it, was a land of mists. The atmosphere of the earth at that time was very much more filled with the water element, and the sun did not actually shine directly on the surface of the earth. It shined through this misty, water-laden atmosphere. So when the Hopi oral history remembers them going up through mist through a reed, this is a memory of this traveling out of the Atlantean space, which was a land of mists, into a land where the sun shined. And all of this, of course, is related to what people are aware of today as the flood stories. The Noah's flood is a description from one point of view of the experience of this time by peoples who didn't live on Atlantis but lived elsewhere in the world at that time. And they too experienced this catastrophe regarding the seas. Again, I'm just taking Steiner's researches into the spiritual and connecting them to the elements of the Hopi prophecy. Okay, I'm not trying to prove one thing or another, but it is interesting that he tells the stories that he tells that confirm quite exactly to the elements of the Hopi prophecy. He also talks about the 20th century and the 19th century and the great wars of this time and the 21st century. Steiner also talks about this being a time of crisis, but he interestingly enough, he doesn't ever say anything about the Hopi prophecy. Now, whether he knew anything about it or not, he did say this in his lectures called The Mission of the Folk Souls. I'll read this. He's talking about the Indians. The Indians then took over with them to the west all that was great in the Atlantean culture. What was the greatest thing of all to the Indians? It was that he was still able dimly to sense something of the ancient greatness and majesty of a period which existed in the old Atlantean epoch, in which the divisions of the races had hardly begun, in which men could look up to the sun and perceive the spirits of form penetrating through a sea of mist. Through an ocean of mist the Atlantean gazed up at that which was to him not divided into 6 or 7, but which acted together. This cooperative activity of the 7 spirits of form was called by the Atlanteans the Great Spirit. He clung firmly to the Great Spirit of the primeval past. Well, the Great Spirit, of course, is something that's in most of the religious traditions of Aboriginal peoples in the West. And one can look at lots of other facts in support of this, just to give a couple. Of course, it's things that natural science have found would tend to disagree, and we can't solve all those problems without going into a lot of detail. But if someone just assumes that because natural science has said that this can't be true, that natural science has got it right, well, as you penetrate more deeply into these discussions that are coming out in the present as songs of a true-eyed brother, you're going to find out that natural science has a lot of limits, and we'll explore some of those. In any event, another one of the things that got said in relationship to all of this is, I lost that thought there. Anyway, Atlantis, from Steiner's point of view, is real, and we could look at the Hopi oral history as a memory of the time of Atlantis. There's in South American Aboriginal traditions a reference to Aztlan. There's in research by archaeologists the existence and discovery of a particular form of stone arrowhead that was made the same way on the east coast of the United States as on the west coast of France, which suggests interesting things. There's more we could go into, but my time is over.